Labour came to power in 2022, the Albanese government had, or the Albanese campaign, really put forward quite a long list of housing commitments, and almost all of those have been ticked off, have been enacted in one way or another since in the 3-year term of Parliament. The only one that we haven't yet seen is the National Housing and Homelessness Plan, which is possibly the most important of them all, and maybe we might see it coming out before the election, but that one we haven't yet seen. So some of the most important commitments that were made, I think the Housing Australia Future Fund, which we heard a lot about in a lot of reporting on the parliamentary battle that went on in 2023, because Labour needed to get legislation through Parliament to enable them to progress that one. So what the Housing Australia Future Fund is to create a stream of income to invest in social and affordable housing, mainly provided by community housing organisations. And that process took the parliamentary stoush, finally came to an end at the end of 2023, and the programme itself has now started to roll out. So it's pretty late in the day, it's pretty close to an election, and there's only the very beginnings of kind of product on the ground as a result of that. But we are just beginning to see that, and I think if Labour manages to be returned to power in some form, they will be pushing that one ahead with I think great speed in the next term of Parliament.
Yeah, so there were two big commitments. I guess we'll focus on the social and affordable housing commitment out of the the Housing Future Fund, and also the National Housing Accord, which had a big aim of 1.2 million homes. So let's get into detail on two of those. Now, first to the National Housing Accord. The aim ultimately is to get more homes and apartments built. What has happened with dwelling approvals since May of 2022? And how does that compare with the long-term averages?
Well, the approvals numbers that we can monitor are actually for building approvals, which is what developers do just before they're ready to actually start a project. Unfortunately, planning approvals, which is the more controversial aspect, the ABS doesn't publish numbers on those for some odd reason, which I really don't understand. We do know, though, that there's been a big build-up of projects which have got planning approval but are not going forward yet because the market conditions really don't make it feasible, don't make it financially viable for developers to actually start on the ground. What we can see from the commencements numbers is that there's been a reduction in house building starts over the last 2 or 3 years, which is a huge challenge for the government. And that's why this 1.2 million target, which they've set themselves, which they've agreed with the states and territories, is an enormous challenge. And I think it's going to be extremely hard for them to make that, mainly because it's the apartment part of the equation which is really giving them trouble. The number of houses that Australia is building is almost the same now as it was during the whole of the last decade. It's the apartment numbers which have really slumped, which are down by about 25% since 2020, and that is really the part of the house building industry which really needs to be pepped up. And the numbers there have fallen away. As I said, not very much at any rate, because planning is failing to give approval for projects. But projects have got approval, and they are not able to go forward at the moment because of the market conditions. And what that's all about is about the very big spike that we've seen in construction costs over the last 2-3 years. Which has really overtaken the value of apartments. The apartment values, apartment prices have not been rising at anything like the rate that house prices have been rising. And until those two trends start to come back to some sort of normality, we probably won't see the apartment construction numbers start to recover.
Okay.
I expect that's going to happen. I expect that the reduction in interest rates that most people expect to take place during this year will help to make that trend begin.
Okay, so that's covered the 1.2 million target. What about how things going with the plan to build 30,000 social and affordable homes within 5 years?
Yeah, so that programme was finally cleared Parliament at the end of 2023, and the mechanics of it were being worked through last year. So the government approved the first about 1/3 of the homes that they plan to achieve over 5 years. They approved about 1/3 of that number towards the end of 2024, and the very first projects under those, which are part of that approved program, are now just beginning to filter through. So, yeah, it's taken a long time.
Yeah.
We're pretty close to the end of the parliamentary term, and it's only just beginning to filter through to product on the ground. So I think government would be a bit frustrated with that.
Yep.
And the frustration comes out of the fact that it took a year to get the Senate to finally agree to give legal authority for this programme at the end of 2023.
Okay.
I think if Labour was to manage to get back into power, then during the next term of government, they would really be going full steam ahead with that programme.
Okay, so housing is obviously something that takes time to get underway. Taking that into account, how do you rate the government's overall progress so far after it's made these big commitments?
I think they've made a very good start. They came to power when we'd had federal governments for pretty much a decade, which had taken only a very, very narrow interest in housing and had really neglected the sharp end of rental stress and homelessness issues. So in that, trying to tackle that side of things as well as first home ownership, the Albanese government was taking on a much bigger range of, it was taking on a much bigger challenge, a much wider range of issues. So I think if you take that into account, they haven't done badly over the past 3 years. What we really don't know, though, is whether is what the ambition is for another term of government, if they were lucky enough to be re-elected. And there's been almost nothing said so far about what Labour might be taking to the election in terms of new housing commitments.
But we know that ambition of 1.2 million over the next period. But even if these targets were met, would they have a substantial impact on overall affordability?
I think they would help if the 1.2 million homes was achieved, and maybe if we were able to continue building at that level for the next 5 or 10 years. Then yes, I mean it would help to, I think, at the very, very least, slow down the rise in both house prices and rents. So it's part of the solution. But the problem that myself and I think a lot of others housing economists and others would say is that we really need to be focusing on the excess of housing demand as well as the inadequate amount of supply. And the current government has turned its face rather away from that. And I think what we're looking for is that for the next term of government, there's a more balanced approach to looking at both sides of that equation.
And so what are you suggesting there in terms of how to address excess demand?
Well, I think we need to recognise, and I think the vast majority of housing economists do recognise, that the tax settings around rental investor income tax settings really encourage overinvestment in housing, which is one of the causes of housing inflation. Not to mention the fact that it's giving away an enormous amount of uncollected tax, mainly to people who are at the middle to higher end of the income spectrum. So it doesn't really fulfill the usual objectives of tax policy, which is to target assistance to people who need it.
So to really get rid of to address this issue, you have to get rid of are you suggesting get rid of negative gearing and capital gains tax exempt?
Well, at the very least, we need to rein in those tax concessions,
Yeah,
and I would say phase them out. I don't think it's realistic to demand that they're ended tomorrow or even
yeah,
day after the next election. But I do think that over a period of time we need to phase those down, and we also need to look at how other changes to the tax system which could enable us to make much more effective use of the housing stock we already have. We don't use our housing stock in a very effective way or a very efficient way in Australia. We've got an enormous proportion of underutilized homes, quite a fair chunk of the population now who have two or three homes, but unfortunately far too many who have none.
yeah.
And I think it's the distribution and the utilization of housing which is another aspect of the way our housing system is really not working very well. And we can't just say supply, 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 supply. That's the answer to every housing problem. It's something that we need to focus on, but not to the exclusion of all these other issues.